Hello everyone and welcome to Keeping Up with Disney. My name is TJ Nichols and I will be walking you through the decisions that the Walt Disney Company has made and how those decisions have contributed to their success in regards to the chapters of our textbook. First, I want to take you back to the beginnings of the Walt Disney Company and walk you through a brief timeline of events and milestones that have shaped the company throughout the years. Let's go back to the early 1920s when a very young Walt Disney and his brother Roy Disney started the Disney Brothers Studio. In 1923, they signed a contract to produce a series of shorts called the Alice Comedies. Just a few years later, in 1928, they released Steamboat Willie, which was the first introduction of our very familiar Mickey Mouse character. Shortly after that, they released Flowers and Trees, which was the first ever full-color cartoon. And just like that, Disney's reputation of an industry innovator was born. In 1940, Disney became publicly traded, and in 1950, they released Treasure Island, which was the first feature-length film with interactive cartoon and animation. In 1955, Disneyland opened, and over the next decade, Disney would continue the reputation of an industry leader by introducing things such as Disney Interactive and the Disney Channel, which featured 18-hour-length programming. The Walt Disney Company would enter the global market by featuring its theme parks in cities like Hong Kong, Tokyo, and France. The Walt Disney Company would also make a series of acquisitions including Pixar Animation Studios, Fox Family, and the most recent acquisition, Lucasfilm and its subsidiaries. Now that was a very brief introduction of the Walt Disney Company, but that brings us up to date. So let's take a look at Chapter 1. Chapter 1 gives us an introduction to strategic management. We talk about change and how it can be either fast or slow. For the Walt Disney Company, change is constant as well as swift. Disney uses this constant change in aid to their innovation, which keeps them at the top of their industry. Chapter 1 also talks about formulation and implementation and the relationship between the two. Walt Disney paints that picture perfectly for us in the early 1950s. He had a dream that there was a place where children and parents could have fun together. He dreamed that there was waterfalls, rivers, flying elephants, giant teacups, and most importantly, the personal interaction with television and animated characters. Walt Disney's dream for such an imaginative place was great, except for one thing. Walt could not convince the investors that such an imaginative place would turn a revenue. So Mr. Disney formulated a plan that he would use his existing television audience and target them by creating a TV show called Disneyland, which featured his ideas and imaginative creatures, which excited people about such a place called Disneyland. After seeing the ratings for the TV show and the excitement about such a place called Disneyland, Walt finally convinced his investors that such a place would turn a revenue, and ground broke in July of 1954 in sunny Anaheim, California. Just a year later, the first ticket was sold, and today Disneyland sees an average of 14 million visitors a year. Also in Chapter 1, we are introduced to the business strategy diamond. We see that Mr. Disney used all the components in the strategy diamond to make his Disneyland dream come true. In his mind, the arenas for Disneyland included the interactive family market segment, who happened to be the audience of his current television show. He intended to derive support for Disneyland through his most key stakeholders, the existing audience. He used those TV shows as a vehicle to develop the interest to finance the drive of the construction of Disneyland. Then he highlighted his differentiations by creating something that has never been created before, a park where children's imaginations can become a reality and they can do so with their parents. He then designed both the internal and external components of the park, including the park's location strategically based on the surroundings and transportation flow of Anaheim, California. As we can see by Walt Disney's dream for Disneyland, the formulation and implementation are actually two processes in one. In Chapter 2, we see how important and essential it is for strategic leadership to be a part of the formulation and implementation process. We also see that behind every successful company, there is a set of core values and similar interests that drive the company to its success. These core values and goals are usually strategically communicated through the company's vision and mission statement. When looking at the Walt Disney Company's mission statement, we see that, and I quote, "The mission of the Walt Disney Company is to be one of the world's leading producers and providers of entertainment and information." So we see that they want to be an industry leader, and they also go on to say, and I quote, "Using our portfolio of brands To differentiate our content, service, and consumer products, we seek to develop the most creative, innovative, and profitable entertainment experiences and related products in the world. So we see that the Walt Disney Company not only wants to be an industry leader, but they want to have their handprint all over the world, as well as be a successful, profitable company while delivering that magical experience to its many end users of the differentiated products and services that they offer. Although Mr. Disney did not write this mission statement himself, it is based on the values that he lived by every day, such as leadership, serving, and making dreams come a reality. Mr. Disney believed in his visions and dreams for the company so much that it was contagious to everyone he was around, and it's that strategic leadership that made this company so successful. In Chapter 3, we examine the internal environment, including the activities, capabilities, and resources. We are first introduced to the concept of competitive advantage and how these resources and capabilities and activities help aid in gaining that competitive advantage over their rivals. In looking at the Walt Disney Company resources, we find that there are two different types, tangible and intangible. Some examples of tangible resources include their land and real estate, as well as financial capital, labor, and inventory. Examples of intangible resources include their patents, trademarks, knowledge, culture, location, and reputation. The way in which the Walt Disney Company utilizes these resources is called their capabilities. One of the ways that the Walt Disney Company prefers to utilize their resources is to identify the key stakeholders involved and ask how would they utilize the resources. As you can see in my blog, Keeping Up with Disney, I use the example of the Disney Planet Challenge as an example of this. Disney has an incredible and competitive advantage in the education market, and they didn't just get this overnight. Disney identified the importance of education early on. So they met with the National Science Teachers Association and the West Ed K-12 Alliance to form what is called the Disney Planet Challenge. The Disney Planet Challenge brings Disney right into the classroom of elementary and middle school students and encourages them to research and develop solutions to current environmental threats. So in this example, Disney identified their resources, contacted these organizations as key stakeholders in the issue, and asked them how would you utilize these resources, and translated that into activities such as the Disney Planet Challenge. In Chapter 4, we shift our thinking from internal to exploring the external environment. We look at macro and industry dynamics and how Porter's 5 forces, which includes the potential entrant threat, the threat of buyer power, substitutes, supplier power, and how all of those work together to form the industry rivalry, and how that affects a company and its external environment. The Walt Disney Company is part of the entertainment diversified industry, and as you can see by the picture that I took on June 13th at 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, you can see that Disney is doing relatively well compared to the industry standard. But that does not mean that they are not constantly threatened by their external environment. Disney is one of several large corporations in its industry, including Comcast Corporation, Time Warner, Digital Cinema Destinations, and Starz. There are few barriers to entry, however, competition is very fierce. The main threat in this industry doesn't really come from new entrants, but instead acquisitions from other companies. Supplier power is relatively low in this industry, mainly because the companies have integrated backwards through the supply chain and have become their own suppliers of their materials. Buyer power is relatively high. With all the advances in technology, consumers today are looking more towards digital downloads versus going to the store and purchasing DVDs or Blu-ray, and so Disney has to stay on top of this new technology and developing new ways to providing their products to the end consumers in a relative way that consumers are willing to buy at a certain price. This really encourages a lot of R&D to keep up with the ever changing technology in this industry, and so that increases the rivalry threat, because in an industry that the technology moves so quickly, you have to keep up with it. Really, the first firm to develop that new technology and get it to the end user is going to be the industry leader. And so it's on Disney to create more value in their product versus the competitor's product. And so we see a lot of external environment pressure on these companies to create value, and they do so by their tangible and intangible resources, and in managing those to create value down the chain to the end consumer. In Chapter 5, we talk about creating business strategies and differentiation versus low-cost leadership. In my blog, I talk about how Apple transformed their industry by creating value in their product. They didn't invent the MP3 player or the phone or the internet, but they brought them all into one product because that's what the end user desired, and no one else had done that before. Disney does the same thing. They create value, they innovate new technology into their theme parks and in their end products, and as a result, they set themselves apart from their competitors by creating more value than that in their competitor's product. So really being a key differentiator has really played a huge part in Disney's overall success in crafting their business strategy. Now in Chapter 6, we talk about crafting that business strategy for a dynamic context. Now, what do we mean by dynamic context? We mean industries with a lot of change and new idea generation with advances in technology and constant innovation, which perfectly describes the entertainment diversified industry which Disney is a part of. Now, that industry was overhauled several years ago with the introduction of satellite and cable, which provided end users with channels like HBO, Stars, and Encore, where they could watch the kind of movies they want to watch by genre. You know, there is a Stars Funny channel, and there is a Stars Horror channel, and there's a Stars Romance channel. So people could get generally what they wanted to watch. Now, a few years ago, the industry was overhauled once again with the introduction of Netflix and iTunes and Apple TV and stuff like that, where end users could watch whatever movie or TV show they wanted on demand. Now, with the introduction to this new technology, it kind of hurt companies like Disney and Warner Brothers because people were no longer watching their movies and TV shows on these TV channels. Instead, they were paying $7.99 a month to watch whatever they wanted, specifically anytime they want. And so a lot of these companies were upset, but where other companies saw this as a disadvantage, Disney saw this as an opportunity. And so Disney signed a contract with Netflix to offer Disney's entire collection exclusively to Netflix. In that moment, Disney became what's called a first mover company. They were the first in its industry to do something like that. And so the companies that quickly fell behind Disney and did similar things with Netflix didn't really receive quite as big of a contract payoff as Disney, but they weren't left behind like the majority of the companies who are still not on Netflix. And so the whole first mover concept really became Disney's corporate strategy for surviving in a dynamic context, and pairing that with their constant innovation and improvement, they are able to sustain as the industry leader. And speaking of corporate strategy, that's what we look at in Chapter 7, developing that corporate strategy. And I use the example of the evolution of the Pixar animation studios all the way from George Lucas and Lucasfilm to the Walt Disney Company acquisition. Starting in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Disney began making several acquisitions of entrant companies into the industry to really better themselves and better their image and really reach out to a more diverse audience. And it all started with this acquisition of Pixar. In 1986, the small computer graphics division of Lucasfilm Ltd. was purchased by Steve Jobs for $10 million. And after the purchase, Jobs named it Pixar, and developed the new technology and animation software to produce short films and commercials for television. Pixar was able to create a 3D-like character, giving new context to commercials and really just innovating the animation industry as a whole. Today, Disney's Pixar creates several movies that I'm sure you're all familiar with, such as the Toy Story series, and one of their most popular, the Monsters Incorporated series. And so really this acquisition benefited both companies, Disney and Pixar, benefited Disney because Disney now had access to the revolutionary technology that Pixar was using, and it benefited Pixar because Pixar now had the vast array of brands and really the spotlight that Disney was receiving in the existing industry that it wanted to enter. And I like this example because Pixar originated with Lucasfilm and was eventually acquired by Disney, and that kind of serves as a foreshadowing because Disney actually acquired all of Lucasfilm and its subsidiaries in 2012. And so we really see a full circle of the mutual benefit happening that an acquisition can bring much later in 2012 with Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm. In Chapter 8, we start thinking globally by looking at international strategies. When entering a global market, there's several things a company has to do to keep in mind. There's so many barriers to entry, including foreign laws, cultural differences, and socio-cultural responsibilities. A company really has to develop an international strategy, and most companies do that through a couple different avenues. In this case, the Walt Disney Company started with outsourcing and eventually moved to licensing and franchising. The Walt Disney Company began their global market entry by outsourcing a lot of the production and manufacturing processes for its end products. They found that it was much less expensive to produce their merchandise in developing countries such as China or Taiwan rather than here in the United States. And so this really gave them a good feel for what it takes to enter the global market, and then so they began licensing. Now if you walk down the Champs-Élysées in Paris and you walk into a souvenir shop and you see a t-shirt with the Eiffel Tower on it, and there's Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse standing next to the Eiffel Tower, and they do that through licensing. Disney gives that company a license to use Mickey and Minnie Mouse, and so both companies, both the manufacturing company and Disney, benefit by making more value and creating that value for the end customer into that t-shirt. So whether it may have been a t-shirt with just the Eiffel Tower on it, consumers are less likely to buy it than a picture of Mickey and Minnie Mouse standing next to the Eiffel Tower, because they see Mickey and Minnie and they automatically associate that value with Disney's prestigious reputation of creating high value and high quality merchandise and service. And so that's how Disney made their entrance into the global market. And now they have furthered that by building theme parks in Hong Kong, Tokyo, and in Paris. So people all over the world can really get a hold of that value that's created in their theme parks and resorts and be familiar with those characters. And that really just furthers that quality and that brand reaching greater audiences in the market segment. Now in Chapter 9, we start talking about alliances and corporate strategies and how they work together. And a perfect example is given with Disney and Nikon. A lot of times when two different companies share the same views and the same goals, they will come together and work as one company to really achieve those goals and to achieve higher standards that they wouldn't otherwise achieve separately. And we see that with Disney and Nikon. Disney has a reputation of really making dreams come true, and Nikon wants to capture every moment of those dreams. And so they work so well together. Now when you go to any of Disney's theme parks, those picture perfect moments, which you used to have to spend hours trying to find, and that was hours that you couldn't really spend enjoying the park itself and all the attractions and food that you can get there. And so now Nikon has set up signposts that really designate those picture perfect moments. So on your way to a ride, you can pass one of those signposts, snap a quick snapshot, and continue on your way, and you spend a lot more time enjoying the park and its attractions. In addition to these signposts, Nikon is now the quote official camera of the mouse. And so when you're in the park and you pass by a Disney cast member who wants to take your picture next to Mickey Mouse and Goofy, they're using the latest camera technologies from Nikon. In Chapter 10, we study more about mergers and acquisition, and in case you couldn't guess from earlier, we're going to be studying Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm. George Lucas was a man of impeccable imagination. He developed that imagination into the ever-so-successful Star Wars franchise. He always said that he believed Star Wars would extend beyond his generation. As the sole owner of Lucasfilm and its subsidiaries, George Lucas built the companies from scratch. And so you can imagine how hesitant he was to pass on their impressive legacy into new hands. But in 2012, that's exactly what he did. He signed a contract releasing Lucasfilm and its subsidiaries into the ownership of the Walt Disney Company. George Lucas said himself that it was time to pass on his creation to a younger generation of filmmakers. And by doing so, the Walt Disney Company gained ownership of the Star Wars franchise as well as the technology that the Lucasfilm and other subsidiaries offered. And because the Walt Disney Company has been so successful in its acquisitions over the past, including that of Pixar, ABC Family, George Lucas can rest assured that his baby will be in good hands for generations to come. In Chapter 11, we talk a lot about the lean manufacturing methods, and a lot of people question what can Disney in the entertainment industry have in common with manufacturing methods, and the answer is simple: everything. The lean manufacturing methods talk a lot about reducing waste and continuous improvement, and the Walt Disney Company sets a great example in both categories. I really enjoyed this chapter because it gave me an opportunity to really study and get my hands on how Disney's processes work in achieving its goals. One of the reoccurring themes in the lean process is continuous improvement. Disney is a good example of how a company utilizes continuous improvement to achieve its goals. The example I used in my blog was the strollers in Magic Kingdom example. Guests with small children would enter the park, and immediately after entering, they would go rent a stroller for their children. Now, after renting the stroller, they decided that the first thing they wanted to do was to ride the train. Unfortunately, the Disney strollers do not fold up in order to fit on the train like custom strollers do. And so this posed a problem where people would have to abandon their newly rented stroller and have to go rent one somewhere else in the park after they got off the train. So this created a lot of anger. Guests voiced their opinions about it, and cast members who worked on the train got together and formulated an idea that instead of returning the empty strollers found in the park to the nearest stroller rental station, cast members would simply return the strollers to one of the nearest 3 train stations. So now when you enter Magic Kingdom and you rent a stroller, you don't have to worry about taking it on the train. You just get your kids, get on the train. When you get off at the next stop, there's going to be an empty stroller there waiting for you. And so that was a really good example of how continuous improvement works. And although something may have worked in the past, it doesn't mean it necessarily is going to work in the future. How Disney deals with the 7 ways of lean can be seen everywhere, but one of my favorite examples is how they deal with waiting. Everyone knows that when you go to a theme park, you're going to be waiting for something, whether it's waiting in line to get into the park, or waiting in line to get onto your ride, or waiting in line to get something to eat. Disney deals with this by entertaining the guests while they wait. One of my favorite examples of this is seen on the Rock and Roll roller coaster down in Orlando, Florida at the Disney theme park. While you wait in line, you get to enjoy all sorts of interesting facts and music about Aerosmith, the band, and right before you get on the ride, you get to go into what looks like the recording studio where Aerosmith is performing. Now, this doesn't exactly cut down on the time you spend waiting, but it makes the guests feel like their wait time is less since they're being entertained simultaneously. In Chapter 12, we studied new ventures and corporate renewal. Chapter 12 talks a lot about the entrepreneurial aspects of business and really how businesses transform from that entrepreneurial activity into a more experienced, well-developed company. One way an organization or company can do that is through what's called an IPO. Like we said earlier, the Walt Disney Company was originally started by Walt Disney and his brother Roy Disney back in 1923. They started as an animation company, kind of performing cartoons and really innovating the industry by developing the industry's first animation feature links. And eventually, like most successful startups do, the company grew and it became time to pursue different avenues in financing their activities and growing in their market. And so one way they did that was through their IPO, which in 1957, one share of Disney stock was $13.88, and they issued 155,000 of those stocks. Today, those same stocks, if you were to hold it through all the stock splits that Disney had and reinvested those stocks back into the market, they would be worth about $30,000 per share. Today, Disney is publicly traded on the Dow Jones market. It is currently one of the Dow 30. And you might be asking yourself, why would a private company want to outsource its ownership to the public? And there's several answers, but one of the answers that's most popular is the investment that the public can make back into the company. Each of those shares of ownership are worth a certain amount, and people pay money to own a portion of your company, and that revenue gets put back into the company that the company can use to finance other activities that in circle create more value in the company, raising that share price, which can be sold at a higher price than the IPO. So it really comes full circle. If you're a growing company and you want to be publicly traded, an IPO is the way to go. In Chapter 13, we talk about corporate governance in the 21st century. The Walt Disney Company is a good example of corporate governance because it does have its chief executive officers, its chief financial officers, its chief operating officers, but those officers really make decisions to keep the well-being of the company. But Disney is publicly traded, so there's several thousand owners of Disney who get a say in what Disney does in its policies, but they're represented by what's called a board of directors. The example I used in my blog was when the Walt Disney Company board of directors appointed their latest CEO, Robert Iger. And when companies appoint CEOs, there's not really an election. The board of directors, who represent the stakeholders and the shareholders in the company, get together and they appoint this person because they believe that person is best for the future of the company. And in Disney's case, Mr. Iger has done a very fantastic job in representing Disney both nationally and internationally. He has shared values and goals for the Walt Disney Company and has really done a great job in leading the company to those goals. In conclusion, the Walt Disney Company is one of the biggest media companies in the world. However, the most pressing strategic issue that the Walt Disney Company is dealing with right now is the threat of rivals. NBC's Universal Studios is probably Disney's biggest rival right now. It competes with Disney in almost every segment that Disney competes in. One of the things that has kept Disney at the top is its constant innovation and adaptation. And I think that as long as Disney puts that at the forefront, they're going to be alright. But the second that Disney puts that on the back burner, NBC Universal is going to pick that up and become the industry's leader in innovation. And that's when Disney's really going to see some issues amongst rivals in their industry. And I think Disney can really easily overcome this by investing huge amounts into R&D, finding the new ways and better ways to get their products to the end consumer and increase the value in their products. And as long as they keep doing that, then this really isn't going to be a pressing issue for Disney. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to listen to my podcast. I've really enjoyed studying the Walt Disney Company. It has really given me a good experience and really digging deep and understanding a company and following a company from start to finish and seeing how they overcome strategic issues and develop their strategies for the future. I hope everyone had as much fun as I did. Thanks again and good luck.